We'll start in a minute in case anybody else wants to join. Okay, I think we can start. So this is unit 3 and 6, human trafficking and migration. And in this unit, we will also see why, and which is what I told in the last class, why we club trafficking and migration. There is a chart that is there in this unit, which I'll show you, where the migration paths and the trafficking paths are overlapped. We shall see that. But before that, quickly a tie back to the last class for people who have come for the first time. Uh, Involves exchange and exploitation of individuals for financial gain. That is human trafficking. As the act of recruiting, transporting, transferring, harboring, or receiving a person through methods such as force, coercion, abduction, fraud, or deception to exploit them. At the end of the day, trafficking is about a financial gain through exploitation of a human being. So that's human trafficking. Exploitation based, while smuggling is transportation based. Smuggling involves taking people from one country to another country illegally. So it's just taking people. It's not a forced activity. It's a consensual activity. At the end of this, after at the end of the transportation, the smuggler allows the smuggled people to go. Whereas in case of trafficking, the trafficked people are then exploited. This is what we studied last time in various trafficking types: exploitation, sexual exploitation, forced labor, debt bondage, domestic servitude. This was a slide that I put last time. As I said, this is a tie back to the last class. And various trafficking type, trafficking for removal of organs. These are the other trafficking types. Forced criminal activity. In fact, sexual exploitation and forced labor are the largest. Again, story of human history is a story of migration. Global as enhanced migration. Inevitably, whenever because the story is that of migration, whenever you try and stop migration, inevitably the migration will happen illegally. So it's always better for nations to facilitate migration in an orderly manner, in the sense that then you will you'll have legal immigrants, you'll have data, you'll have all the things. But as soon as you put barriers to entry, people will do illegally. Reality of people and women in particular is the search for survival and fulfillment. Nobody goes out of their house for the fun of it. Nobody travels for the fun of it. Huh? There might be people who might be traveling for leisure, but that's for leisure. Nobody goes from one place to another without any purpose. And predominantly is the search for survival, fulfillment, creating new identities and a better life for themselves and their families. Everybody who migrates typically does it for a perceived better life. That I use the word perceive because that better is a very subjective term. But say, for example, look at the fact all these migrants who come from rural areas into the city for employment or for a perceived better life, they might end up in a slum, is a different thing. But they perceive it's a better life because they are able to earn some money which they are not able to do it at the rural areas. And it's because of growth of regular or irregular or forced migratory movements in various regions. Now, and why does migration happen? For a better life. Now, this can be spurred by economic crisis, lack of sustainable livelihood, political conflict, civil war. And if you've seen historically, these things continue to happen. So when these things continue to happen, people continue to migrate. And whenever there is a restrictive immigration or asylum policy, then people go through the irregular channels. See, it's like a water flow. You try and build a dam, the water will go over the dam or around it. Globalization has also led to a higher level of mobility of capital and transnational character of industrial production. In fact, in MDI 8, we have seen how the production has changed, how flexibilization, offshoring, outsourcing, everything has happened to try and save cost. So now, when capital is moving and production processes are moving, the labor will move along. This has led to devaluation of human labor and ability to choose labor from any part of the world, leading to increased mass level migration, creating a market for female labor as well as bringing women in the realm of paid labor. So, industrial evolution pushed women into the households. This particular globalization and the new means of production has pushed females back into paid labor. So, migrant smuggling and trafficking both involves recruitment, movement, and delivery of migrants from host country to destination. Trafficking enslaves and exploits, while smuggled migrants have a consensual relationship. As I said, smuggling is more of a consensual relationship. It's a different thing that smuggling might involve debt, where the migrant takes a loan and is smuggled. But if that is the case, then the migrant has to repay the loan in some form and is free to go after that. Whereas a trafficked individual is never free to go unless he is rescued, he or she is rescued. And also, trafficking is a global problem, made its way into public consciousness at the start of the 21st century. A lot of focus by media, feminists, government. Turn of the 21st century, the Palermo Protocol, we had talked about it last time. This Palermo Protocol will keep coming back, in various units. In fact, it becomes a good topic for a question in your end sims or your assignments. No, because this is the starting of the fight against human trafficking. One of the evils haunting the globe. It was actually the global south, specifically the South and the Southeast Asia, where international interest in human trafficking originated. Because people from the global south in 21st century have been disproportionately represented in transnational migration flow. Inevitably, it was the global south which was colonized, and colonization led to exploitation of resources, of capital, and inevitably when these countries got free, there was this drive towards better life, and these people went towards and naturally got affiliated towards to the colonizers. So a lot of Indians went to Britain, but Indians also went to US. Indian went to various countries of Europe, and so with others, nationalities. Okay, so unit 3 and 6 understand causes which lead to human migration and associate concepts related to human trafficking. So let's look at, here is a migration map, a world migration map. So you see these circles within, these are inter-region migration. You see large migrations within the region. Can we term illegal migration through donkey routes as smuggling? Absolutely. Sanjeev, that donkey route is migrant smuggling. But donkey route can also be trafficking, because for a simple reason, most of the migration routes and smuggling routes remain the same. Most of the migrants route, the trafficking routes, and the smuggling routes remain the same.
Okay.
So look at the fact, this is the migrant route. These are major migrant routes. And if I superimpose the trafficking routes, you see, these are the corridors. Because why they are the same is, then the criminals can hide trafficked individuals among the migrants. That's why the routes are the same. So it's like the highways transfer people from point A to point B. The highways also transfer materials from point A to point B. The highways also transfer criminals from point A to point B. The route remains the same. So if you see, and you can check this maps on Google, uh, shows 5% and above of total victims detected. Now, in terms of trafficking, because it is based on detection. So if you do not detect, you do not know whether the person is a trafficked individual or a migrant. So more often than not, these maps were made by based on detections. And that is why migration and trafficking are studied together. Because migrant inevitably is vulnerable to trafficking. So, example of a link between migration and trafficking. So, in a research on human trafficking among Ethiopian returnees, 1342 Ethiopians returning migrants from abroad, status of each returnee of as trafficked or non-trafficked based on UN 2000 definition of trafficking. Half of the returned Ethiopian migrants were trafficked because migrants are anyway vulnerable. And with this new immigration condition, so what the US has done in terms of going after the immigrants, and it started off with non-documented immigrants, but now I was seeing this Al Jazeera report in which they are saying they are now going after documented immigrants. They recently deported a documented legally staying El Salvador man back into the El Salvador prison, and then they admitted that they made a mistake. Poverty was a risk factor for trafficking. Inability to get basic services, insecurity in daily life, disempowerment of community, increased vulnerability to trafficking. Push from parents and relatives, brokers, deceit, false promise of employment, safe travel, false invitations. These are push factors. Pull factors include cheap labor, high demand for commercial sex. So poverty becomes one of the major factors of vulnerability, which pushes people to move, to migrate, and then fall into the trap of traffickers. Then there is the globalization and mobility. Is globalization has increased mobility. So rather than and because of unequal development of areas, people move. Besides poverty, lack of employment opportunities, economic imbalance, corruption, political instability, which have existed since a long time. Led to free market, free trade, greater economic competition, and decline of state intervention in the economy. Faster communication and transport led to greater mobility of goods and people. And with affluent countries trying to restrict migration, people seek illicit means and the growth of illicit trade. And that is why the problem of human trafficking is not stopping. And then, as I was saying, the demand for cheaper things. Now, the cheaper things can only be done by cheaper labor. Cheaper labor is something that you force because no person willingly will do cheap. How women and children have been the biggest loser of globalization. Global crack. When India hit demonetization, it was the women and children who suffered. Global financial crisis, women and children, hard, and resulted in many girls being pulled out of education, given less food to eat, forced to walk. So, if a state is not able to provide potable water, inevitably it's the girls who go and fetch water. Once the girls are going out and fetching water long distances, they are vulnerable. Education. So, for example, schools, lack of public transport. So, in villages, lack of public transportation, schools not available in the village or nearby, long distances. If the girls have to travel, they are vulnerable. And more often than not, parents want them to be pulled out rather than go long distances. Without and then skills. In the absence of skills in education, girls become vulnerable. Not that boys are not vulnerable. See, again, as we talked about last time, because of stigma, most often boys and males are not, are not seen on the data, but they are as vulnerable as girls. Another dimension of globalization: speedy, low cost, and anonymous communication. So now traffickers are linked to the global market. Just like there's a labor market, there's a global market for exploited human beings. Websites have advertised sex tourism, international market of child pornography, brides, organ trade, and everything is happening anonymous and virtual. Transactions can happen anonymous and virtual. Now with capital movements, movement of capital, payments can happen over the internet. So it has given a leg up to the whole concept of human trafficking. So let's look at some of the factors: socioeconomic factors, poverty, economic vulnerability, education, lack of education, awareness, which could be from poor, lack of employment opportunities. Poverty is often cited as the major factor contributing to human trafficking. So if you are poor, there is an illness in the family, the cost of healthcare is so difficult, you are so vulnerable, susceptible to promise of better opportunity, making them vulnerable to trafficking schemes. What typically is happening? A child is unemployed. There is a WhatsApp which comes promising work from home with 50,000 rupees as monthly salary. You are already vulnerable. Two important demographic factors which have contributed to trafficking: population growth and increased imbalances in sex ratio, not ration, ratio in many countries. And because of this unequal growth, so for example, the urban areas provide employment, the rural areas provide nothing. So inevitably, there's an imbalance. So people travel from rural areas into the urban areas, leading to vulnerability. People taken advantage of by criminals. Contributing to trafficking as families adjust badly in big and overcrowded cities. And again, when big and overcrowded cities, you're not able to adjust, children run away, or they are crowded areas, children are picked up, homeless, abandonment, substance abuse. One of the largest cases of trafficking in the US is children running from foster homes. US has a concept of foster homes for children whose parents are not there, who are orphans, who are drug users. Those children run away from foster homes, and once they run away from foster homes, they are entrapped into trafficking. Familiar abuse, exploitation. discrimination, marginalization, gender inequality, violence, cultural norms, gender discrimination, lack of education, economic opportunities, societal norms that devalue women make them vulnerable. LGBTQ plus makes them vulnerable. Marginalized community makes them vulnerable. Family dynamics and exploitation. So there is a stepfather or a stepmother, and there are criminals all around. Parental neglect or abuse lure victims with promises of better life. Social and cultural practices, tradition can facilitate child marriage, dowry system, caste-based discrimination. These are vulnerabilities, and there are criminal networks around which look at which individuals are vulnerable. Internet has created a whole new problem. We shall see how. Individuals with disability, unique challenges and vulnerability, barriers to accessing education, LGBTQ individuals face discrimination. And think about the fact there is an individual facing discrimination or abuse, and in comes a person, promises love, promises safety, promises better opportunity, better life. And more often than not, you're so vulnerable, you fall for the trap, and then you are sucked into the trafficking network. Now, all this has a historical context. As I was saying, in everything that you will study, there is a historical context. So, if you are able to understand the historical context, you can understand why the problem is as it is. Colonial rule, captured Africans were sold as slaves for transport to America, Caribbean's Middle East, indentured servitude, indentured labor from India, China, and Africa, recruited. Indentured was also recruited by deception. There it was exploitation. So exploitation is again historically there in human society. Wars, when wars were fought, the losing party, the men were taken, the men were executed, the women and children were taken as slaves. Rebel leaders in Africa trafficked women and children of their defeated enemy. Historical tradition in today's time has changed from earlier slaves into today's trafficker. It is a modern day slavery. Then barriers to entry to global north. Desire of people of global south to improve their lot. Traffickers explore the desire, exploit the desire. Look at the fact when people in the middle class have this desire to make a lot of money very fast, inevitably most of these people fall prey to Ponzi schemes, to frauds who take all their money. Inevitably, remember, whenever there is a desire, there is a vulnerability which gets created. Ties to those who once colonized, facilitate movement of citizens to those countries, to the former colonizers, help the, and then it's the diaspora. A lot of diaspora facilitate this trafficking, because diaspora then absorb these forced individuals into their communities as domestic servitudes, as working in their fields, etc., helped by the presence of diaspora communities in affluent destinations. So there were concerns of white slave trade of women and young girls into prostitution at the end of the 19th century. Uh, Broader anxieties about growing transatlantic migration, fears directed at Europe. And one of the perspective was that this was to curtail the sexual freedom and mobility of the white woman. Remember, the white woman did not get rights equal to white men the way Indian women got rights equal to Indian men. So that's the historical context. Series of agreements started with the 1910 White Slavery Convention, 1909 Convent of League of Nations, Convention of Suppression of Trafficking of Women. So you again don't need to remember these conventions, but if there is a question on historical historical context of trafficking, you can trace some things to write short notes on. Convention for Suppression of Trafficking in Person and Exploitation of Prostitution. So there were various ways in which finally we came to the Palermo Protocol. As now, trafficking narratives have relied heavily on the pragmatic images of female powerlessness and childlike sexual vulnerabilities and the spectacle of transgressive blood. So there is a political angle to the same. But we've also seen inevitably laws also have a political angle. And as we talked about in the last class, why people are sensitized to sexual trafficking and not to forced labor, because that is the larger media narrative which has come out for the general public. So we can understand sexual exploitation, but we cannot understand forced labor, resulting in non-identification of forced labor. Then, of course, there is political instability and conflict. So, for example, now what we are seeing in the US is some sort of political instability.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, with respect to the route trafficking routes that we just watched the word map along with the arrows and the directions. What is the position of the Malta Boaters Day? The Mediterranean.
Sorry, I didn't get you.
Sir, Malta Boaters Day regarding trafficking. Malta boat.
Oh, Malta. Correct. So now what the point is, inevitably, with the Syrian civil war and because of the Arab Spring, and now, for example, the Israeli bombing Gaza and Palestinian, there is two, and there was this fight in Lebanon, and because of this unstable Middle East, now these people want to escape to Europe. Now, when they are escaping to Europe, there are you have to either go land route, which is long, or you have to cross via the boat.
Sir.
And inevitably, remember what I talked about in the earlier slide. If barriers increase to migration, historically, right from the evolution of human beings have been always mobile and migrating. Now you create a barrier. So people will take on routes which will get them into the same place, but these routes will be dangerous. So now smuggling is happening, and the smugglers, in wanting to make more money, overcrowd their boats so that more people can take that route and escape into Europe, resulting in tragedies.
True, sir.
Gurpreet, we have seen those tragedies. We have seen those tragedies happening in Hooghly, or various boat capsizing in Orissa, in Maharashtra, because there is a profit motive to push more people onto the same boat. Yeah. What we see on the roads in that three-wheelers and that four-wheelers, where actually 3 people are supposed to sit, they squeeze in 9 people.
Jesus.
So that profit motive becomes a very important factor for these disasters to happen, and inevitably, more often than not, people are so constrained in the lack of absence of public transport. What do people do but to take those four-wheelers or five-wheelers in the rural areas, resulting in tragedies. And then there is no regulation, there is no oversight.
Sir.
Same happens internationally.
Sir, clear, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So then there is political instability and conflict, environment pressures, of course. And the new things are the environment pressures. For example, case study in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. City experienced huge influx of migrants, both citizens and non-citizens, wooed with promise of steady paying job. Barriers to safe employment, fair pay, affordable housing, further into poverty. So, now look at India. Rural areas, no employment. Land holdings reduced. What does the guy do? Travel to a city. City, what are the opportunities? No social security, no safe housing, no pay. These people become vulnerable. Exploited, homeless, harassed by law enforcement. What we see typically, police come and beat up the vendors, throw their carts, harassed by law enforcement. Now somebody comes and says, don't worry, we will protect you. The person is vulnerable to trafficking. Legal and policy frameworks. Weak legal enforcement against trafficking, inadequate or adverse immigration policy, corruption and lack of victim protection. Undocumented migrants, asylum seekers often lack legal protection and face heightened risk of exploitation. Fear of deportation, limited access to justice. What again this Al Jazeera report was talking about, in the US currently, they have totally dispensed with due process. They are abducting students. In the last month or so, 300 international students have been abducted. Some have been deported and some have disappeared into detention centers. Now, when you do this, inevitably, and the push will happen because companies or industries need people. There are not enough local workforce or labor force. So what will happen? Migrants will come in. Because you are putting all these, illegal migrants will happen. Then all these, remember, border guards, ICE, police enforcement, these are people. They are corruptible. So, then everything, once you remove the due process, then everything is a fair game. All regions, one reason why crime groups are able to function effectively is because they cultivate close link with law enforcement, embassy personnel, officials like border guards, which help them in their crime. See, inevitably, crime cannot happen if the law enforcement is not with them. Thailand, Nigeria, Russia, law enforcement officials facilitate human trafficking. Significant proportion of police income is derived as a result of tolerating trafficking. We know that those examples in India too. It's everywhere. It's across the world. It's not a country specific problem. It's a human thing. Then, of course, there are intersectionalities and complexities, interplay of multiple factors. Poverty, economic disparities are significant. Likely, people living in poverty more likely to seek employment opportunities abroad, making them vulnerable. Economic inequalities also intersect with factors such as gender, race, amplifying vulnerability among marginalized communities. So there are intersectionality of factors. Well-intentioned international agreements like NAFTA and Schengen, enhanced to promote free trade and cross-border movement, facilitate smuggling and trafficking in persons. Relation between Mexico's land reforms, NAFTA, and increased migration and trafficking. So, as I keep telling in various units, there are an intended effect of a particular policy, particular law, or a particular agreement, but there are unintended consequences which we do not know. And unless governments are sensitive and fast paced in terms of response, think so. For example, one of the discussion I was seeing about US tariffs is this commentator said that US thought it had all the cards, but today the world has moved. Nobody has enough cards to play because of globalization and transnational linkages. And that particular speaker said US has overplayed its hand in putting these tariffs. Again, as I said, these are subject to multiple interpretations, multiple perspectives. One needs to look at all perspectives to get a sense of what it is. And again, when you are answering questions, try and look around and keep it simple. Try and look around in terms of your engagement with your ecosystem, and you will get the answer to in your examination. If you write in terms of your engagement with what you understand around and write it simply, I guess you will be able to answer the questions and will get you marks to clear the examination. Then there are problems of statelessness and trafficking with many border regions in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America outside the control of central state authorities. For example, Dniester, a conflict region between Ukraine and Moldova. Women trafficked from here to Turkey and other destinations receive no protection from legal authorities as a non-recognized state. So, for example, the Roma community in Europe, they don't have a state. So, these kind of intersectionalities and complexities further compound, the fight against human trafficking.
How can there be a non-state, sir?
So, for example, Sanjeev, this Transdniester is a conflict region between Ukraine and Moldova, which has declared itself independent from Moldova. So, it's not a part of Moldova.
Sir.
So, now if a person is trafficked from this particular region and is caught somewhere else, they are non-state. For example, Kurds are non-state. There is no state known as Kurdistan.
Okay.
So either the Kurd person has to say they are from Turkey or they are from Syria or they are from Iraq. Otherwise, they are non-state. And now the legal protection. So for example, if a Kurd from Iraq is trafficked and is detected in Turkey, Turkey will not identify them. Or provide protection.
Right.
You see, there is, in all these things, there is a politics which gets involved. Now, why is Israel stopping even humanitarian aid coming into Gaza after bombing them? It's a politics which is there. So you see, as I said, there are multiple engines working in a particular system. We have to look at, as scholars, we are not commenting on the politics of it, but we are understanding the multiple engines which are running. We are not looking at right and wrong, good or bad.
Sir.
Personally, you can look at right and wrong, good and bad, but while we are studying and giving examples, we are looking at the fact that all these complexities are there. Okay.
So even Rohingyas are also non-state people.
So currently Rohingyas are non-state in a way.
Yes.
Now, International Refugee Convention should get Bangladesh and India to give them refugee status. But because of the internal politics of India and Bangladesh, the Rohingyas become an indeterminate state.
Yes, sir.
Correct. So now,
yes.
For example, in Karnataka, the police came, Karnataka or somewhere, South state, there were these religious groups which came and destroyed Bengali migrants from West Bengal, saying they were Rohingyas. So, when the due process is fiddled around with, then everything is a fair game. That's why due processes become important in statecraft.
Sir.
Okay. Then there is the big question of demand. Demand of cheap labor, demand of sexual exploitation. It's a consumerist society which fuels human trafficking, cheap products. So, for example, I was giving you the example of the World Football, the World Football Cup in Qatar. Qatar building stadiums, immigrating labor from India, from Nepal, and from other countries. These young men going out there with no families. Now they are working as labor. What is their leisure and entertainment? So there is a demand for sex. Now, when there is a demand for sex, it spawns up a sexual exploitation industry, because the state will not provide you, a sexual opportunity. So inevitably, this will be an illegal, and the state will shut eye and look the other way, because they are looking at constructing the stadiums. Cheap fruits, cheap vegetables. Inevitably, this cheap comes from fields where trafficked labor comes in. It's a consumerist society. Demand for adoption by parents in North America, Western Europe sees children trafficked from developing world, former USSR and Asia. Women in workforce in developed countries demand for cheap and domestic labor to take care of children at home, necessitate domestic servitude. Cheap and accessible sexual service demand necessitate sexual slavery. The cheap always comes with the cost. So to increase profits, cracker manufacturers, BD manufacturers, carpet manufacturers employ children because they pay less, increase profits. Demand for sex makes tour operators organize travel by men to regions where trafficked women and children can be exploited. Demand for organs in the US is matched from executed prisoners in China. With criminal net, and now with internet, all this pairing becomes much easier. It's because of the demand. And how do you handle demand? By sensitizing people. So we will come to that in a later unit, I think. Countries or regions where there's a demand for cheap labor and commercial sex are usually the destinations for trafficking. Okay. Global problem made its way into public consciousness at the start of 21st century, pressed by governments, feminists, a lot of focus due to media. It was a global south. As I said, because colonization happened in the global south, these colonies were, exploited in terms of capital, in terms of resources. And once these colonies became independent, people wanted to have a better life. They understood the fact they were colonized. Resources were taken. Again, as I said, nobody leaves house just for the heck of it. Everybody wants to move because they want something better. Mobility of people, another important aspect of globalization has been the high level of mobility of capital and transnational character of industrial production. Wherever there is profit to be made, capital will go there, productions will go there. And if in this 21st century, if leaders, politicians, policymakers cannot understand this, then then there is chaos all around. So now look at the fact. Here is the US government with Donald Trump as the president, and who's advised by Elon Musk as a transnational capitalist. It goes against Musk's interest to have barriers, whereas Trump, being a politician, is looking at the political problem because his constituency demands to go against the immigrants. Musk constituency wants free trade. Now there is obviously a conflict which is brewing. Increase mass level migration, creating a market for female labor, bringing female into the realm of paid labor. Other factors including socio-economic factors, poverty, economic vulnerability, lack of education, discrimination, lack of educational and economic opportunities. So you say there are so many ways in which human beings become vulnerable, and with the presence of criminal gangs, they can get entrapped. With heightened demand for cheap stuff, cheap labor can only happen when human exploitation helps flourishes, continuing to grow in developing world with unequal. And then there is this unequal development. And whenever there is unequal development, they, you know, if you look at the way water flows, wherever there is more pressure, the water, and wherever there is less pressure, water will flow from more to less. So if there is more population in the developing world, less in the developed world has got more amenities, less in, the populations will move. Regional conflicts have not abated, millions displaced, global warming added to more displacement, climate disasters, human trafficking will aggravate. There's an interplay of multiple factors contributing to individuals' vulnerability. Also, there is a historical context. Always there is a historical context to today's problems. There are some references which you can see in the unit. Let me stop here. Questions? Any questions?
Nothing from my side, sir.
Okay. So as I said, again, 3 units I'm taking, MDI 7, 8, and 9. Understand the macro aspect. This particular unit is much more easy to understand in terms of what are the factors. 7 and 8, I said, don't get stuck into the economics part of it. In this also, if you look at it from everything around you, you will be able to answer questions which come in an examination. Even when you are doing assignments, you could check out media reports. So broad-based understanding and a macro understanding of the subject will allow you to answer questions and pass your examination. Should not be a problem. In fact, as I said,
Okay.
Most of the units in MDI 9 have been written by me. I have written it as simply and as logically to understand as possible. So when you go through the units, it will come as a linear understanding. And that is why I combined 3 and 6 together to able to understand. So in 6, for example, I've given some percentage figures and so on and so forth. You don't need to worry about the percentage. If there is a 60%, you can say majority. If it is less, you can put a minority, so that words will help you to write an answer. Shabir, any question?
Sir.
Gurpreet.
Sir, in Punjab Agriculture University Department of Sociology and Economics, conducted a study regarding the rural migration from Punjab.
Correct.
In the multiple question answers, they tabulated that the unemployment is 72%. Then bad governance is 62%. Fear of the parents that their children will indulge in drugs is 52%. and the groupism and fear of criminal cases is 51%. Is this criteria
So
is
drugs was number 3.
number
Drugs
3?
was number 3.
True, sir.
Okay.
So these are for migration. The same pattern may be with the human trafficking also, illegal destination.
See again, Gurpreet, you need to understand. So these are the reasons why people are migrating.
Sir.
Now, if you remember the case which happened, I think in 2023, where these women from Punjab, from various districts, were rescued by the MP Vikramjit. They were trafficked to the Gulf areas with false promises.
Sir.
So if unemployment is the number one concern, then inevitably that will make people vulnerable to trafficking.
True, sir.
And unless there is research conducted, how much research is happening in this area in India? For example, how many papers are being written in terms of returnees, in terms of questions to the migrants? There is hardly anything. So how do we know how many people are being trafficked?
True, sir. True.
It's only when a case like the Middle East, these women in the Middle East came about, that Punjab government took action against some, travel agents. In fact, recently also I was reading about how in some Amritsar district or some district, some travel agents have been blacklisted, shut down. So, see, this is where universities come in. This is where academia comes in to do research, to write papers, to bring these kind of data in front of people, because then that's how pressure comes on the politicians and policymakers to form policies. Otherwise,
absolutely.
Sorry.
Please, sir, continue, please.
Otherwise, the statecraft is so complex because it's a complex society. It's a big society. It's a complex society. So there has to be processes as to how you determine what you are trying to do. Gurpreet?
Very true, sir. Sir, regarding the unauthorized travel agents, the Punjab government as well as ED made some raids and did some job for their
Correct. So unless they come out with a policy as to how, as a policy, new agents will come in, or what is their verification in terms of what they are doing, who is overseeing them, there has to be a policy for all this, and the policy has to be simple and easily reviewable, and then policy has to be reviewed. There has to be some accountability. Now, inevitably, what we are doing is we bringing out a law with no understanding about how it is being executed. So you bring out a law. Now, for example, in COVID, what was the role of police in COVID? It was a health emergency. Why was police? Because the policeman is, bound by his particular training into policing. How does a policeman understand a health emergency? But police was used. So police ko to danda marna aata hai because law and order.
Sure.
So that is why, you need to understand it's a complex, interplay of systems. You need to have a policy. Somebody has to think through, because there are intended consequences, there are unintended consequences. It's a large, diverse country like India. Smaller countries face enough problems.
Absolutely true, sir. Absolutely true. Sir, actually, the system remains silent for regarding such issues. The island centers in the Punjab in the last 3-4 years, just they pumped out the youth like a battery is being pumped out of.
Gurpreet, listen. There is a political system. The political system works on the citizen system, the people system, their concerns, and then there is a media engine which highlights issues. Now everybody gets co-opted into saying, "Oh, road ban gayi, ye ho gaya." Now, at the end of the day, what we talked about growth and development, the GDP numbers do not denote anything in terms of well-being of the people and the citizens. And that's where the academia comes in, the media comes in to highlight issues, to talk about them. Researchers come in to research and bring out issues. Then there is a public pressure on the politicians. Otherwise, the politicians, why would they want to work? They don't think it as a priority across the world.
Very true, sir. Sir, very little studies by the educational institutions. Very little. Even the problem or thesis of PhD students. Very little related to the real work.
Then again, the universities are not being pushed by the community-based organizations, by politicians to do something different. So it becomes an interplay of things. Everything goes down then.
True, sir. Unfortunate story, sir. Sir, thank you so much. Have a pleasant evening.
Same to you. Have a nice week ahead, and I'll see you next week, Saturday, with MDS7. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye, guys.